Hello and welcome to our show. I have with me today Bob Dunkerley, who is President and CEO of Helianthus LLC, and specialist in education, after school, and probably various other things as well. So today we're here and we're at Patch at the offices, and you've come in to help us with some of our training and data and evaluation needs. And we decided to do a show and talk about what it is that you do and get into on a regular basis.
Alrighty. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity, and it's great to always be here at Patch. There's always so many things going on. Our company is centered in Elkins, West Virginia, and we it's kind of a tourist destination. We have the Mountain State Forest Festival and our train rides and things, but it's also a place where folks appreciate learning, and that's kind of what Helianthus is about. It helps folks. We want to help folks who want to improve their effectiveness in learning venues, not only in schools but in the corporate side, and help the learners engage in a way that makes the learning very personal and lifelong. In fact, Helianthus is a Greek word for sunflower, which is our metaphor for lifelong learning. A sunflower is a heliotrope, and it follows the sun. And so that was my wife's idea, actually. So she named the company. I kind of wish we had picked a shorter name, especially with all the emails and such. But anyhow, we want to help folks who are in the process of improving learning venues, mostly for children, but we do have a corporate side for adult learners too. You know, in the corporate world, they're always interested in NPD, new product development. So we want to help their employees think differently about the processes they engage in creating new products. Consequently, then improving the company's overall efficiency. And that's what we do for schools as well. And with Patch specifically, how can we not only find ways to help the teachers engage the students, but then again represent the bigger picture of what extended learning, and that's what we call it. Extended learning is all about after school, before school, Saturday school, but extended learning models and how to attach those concepts to the national, international perspective on that form of learning.
So you bring a lot to the table, and when we have our conversations, and every time I talk to you, you're always into something new, and it's always based around education, which is fantastic. A little bit of background about yourself. I mean, I know who you are, but for somebody that says, you know, who is exactly is this Bob Dunkerley fella? Talk a little bit about your experience, because it's something that I bank on heavily with any of my issues and stuff. I say, you know, we call up Mr. Dunkerley and we'll have some answers. So
I spent
a little bit of background.
34 years in public schools in West Virginia. 27 of them I was a high school band director, and in fact I'm still involved as a judge. I've been doing that for 20 years. And then I spent 7 years as a central office administrator. And it was during those years that Dave and I first became acquainted through the after-school initiatives of 21st Century CCLC, Community Learning Centers, and in the process of creating the grants and then the peer reviews. I think you actually came to Tucker County,
where I was
and reviewed our grant, and we learned a lot and about the processes as well. And then, of course, that was the strength. Everybody traded off and visited, and it helped build that network. So, but I've always been curious about and had a high value for extended learning, and because sometimes it just takes longer for some kiddos to really engage in the process, or maybe there's something that they're specifically interested in that's not available during the regular school day. So teachers then can you know, bring that to the table in after school learning. Like one thing, we had kiddos who were very involved with pets. I mean, so we had a program with the Humane Society, and kids
and making that connection. That's important.
And those kiddos, some of them were actually, you know, that was the reason why they even attended school, because they knew that they
gave them that one thing to focus on.
Absolutely.
That they could do.
And I think that's one of the real strengths about after school and extended learning programs is that it allows the curriculum to connect to that personal level, that passion, what makes that individual, not only the student but the teacher.
Right.
I mean, they share that passion too. And I've been fooling around with this book, and the working title is called "The Moths Only Gather When the Light Bulb's On." So when the teacher is excited, and your teachers in the program are all specialists.
Yep.
Many of them are specialists in a specific area, so they obviously have a great passion, and the kiddos really like that.
Yep.
I remember viewing Mr. Zanuck. He loves fishing.
Yep.
And the tie flying, and oh my goodness, I mean, there's nobody who's more expert fisherman, but he brought that to that class, and the kiddos were doing their thing. I mean, they could tell you all about it. It's not just.
And now it bleeds over into stream study and water
Oh,
quality. The high-end sciences,
ecology
all through
issues, yeah.
Yep, all through fishing. It's
Oh, yeah,
crazy.
those
Don't
kiddos-
encourage Zach. 'Cause but no, I'm joking. But yeah.
But I mean, and the kiddos, when I'd ask them about it, they would go, why this particular fly is important, and
Yep.
the particular kind of fish for which this is designed, and I mean, they knew all about
Yep.
it. And you know what I'm thinking? Shoot, if that didn't happen now, when was that going to happen?
Right.
And so there you go. That's the strength of the whole program.
So when we talk about your experience and your background, one of the things that I particularly take advantage of by knowing you is the fact that you have the school-based knowledge, the central office knowledge, and then you also have the fine arts knowledge, and tying those together, because in just for my own purposes, after school realm, there's the community-based programs, the Boys and Girls Clubs, and ours, which are not necessarily school-based. We work with the schools, but we have a community-based initiative. Keeping kids safe is the predominant philosophy that we have. And then you have some that work in between, and then you have the school-based ones, which are focused on improving test scores and so forth. So when we're looking at the after-school model or working with kids, you have the capacity of enveloping all. And that's, I feel, the biggest advantage I have to knowing you and calling on you and saying, listen, we need somebody that has the background from the school side, but also has the fine arts side and the community-based issues as well. You tie them all together so well.
And what that really boils down to is what we call a shared vocabulary.
Right.
You know, the good work that you do in the after-school program here, or all after-school, whether it's school-based, community-based, faith-based, the whole point here is that it's helping connect young people primarily to learning, and which helps them with efficacy and gives them
Yes.
a leg up on life about the way they feel about themselves. They can be successful. You know,
Yep.
oftentimes in life's path, that is the one thing that will make the difference between being a successful person or being a person who's always searching and never
Right.
really realizes that success.
And we talked about that, being a productive citizen.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
that's what it comes back to, is if you have a student that's going to grow up and be a productive citizen,
Right.
then they've got it made. Your community is then garnering another asset.
Well, you know, and that's the whole point. Society is going to extract its due one way or the other. I mean, we can, you know, folks who make bad choices and end up in the clink, or we can help them as young people find a productive pathway and less likely to become a burden on society
Right.
and become that productive person. But I want to go back to what you were talking about. You're very generous in your description. The thing that oftentimes happens is these initiatives are developed in isolation rather than collaboratively.
Right.
And folks in Washington, D.C., they have their way of thinking about things and their vocabulary, and the folks in Charleston oftentimes have their way of thinking about things and vocabulary, and certainly the fine folks at Patch have their unique qualities and things too.
Yep.
But getting them to talk together, it's
Yep.
kind of like, you know, computers. If they're not all on the same, you know, program, they can't talk to
Interact,
one another.
yeah.
So what we're able to do, and that's one of our mission at Helianthus, is to break down those barriers and get people out of silos and get them to the table and
Yep.
start talking. And because at the end of the day, we really all want the same thing.
Right.
But oftentimes, because of the isolated nature in which these initiatives grow, they go straight up. They don't seem to branch out.
Right.
And what we try to do is bring those components together and help folks find the necessary partners to make their initiatives work. effectively.
Effectively, that's the key. So now let's bleed that over into the extended learning model.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about that and just carry through with what you were talking about. So we're talking the big picture,
Yeah.
getting people to branch out, and then so the new extended learning model.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of conversation, and it's been going on for about 20 years now, but recently here in West Virginia, talk about year-round school.
Right.
And, I'm sure there's a lot of kiddos out there thinking, oh boy, I really don't want that. But, the reality of the situation is in Germany, where I taught a little bit, and certainly in Japan and other developed nations around the world, the schooling models are year-round. And that's mostly so that kiddos don't have learning regression.
Right.
We have a 2.5 month break in the summertime, which is a great time to visit and things, but oftentimes, especially for young learners, they fall back unless they keep up with it. And then, so what happens then?
And actually, I know the statistic for Roane County. It's 6 months of reading regression for K through 5.
Oh yeah, well.
I mean, 6 months of reading regression is a heck of a statistic.
And that's not an isolated thing. It's everywhere.
Right.
It's not just Roane County. I mean, it's very good that someone such as yourself in Roane County has made that connection, because it's very important for the kiddos. Everything is so text-based. I mean,
Yep.
just imagine if you didn't know how to read.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a gateway skill. And what the statistics say that if a student doesn't read on level by the end of 3rd grade, chances are they're going to be behind the learning curve, because the models change. Up until 3rd grade,
Yep.
we use a classroom model of learning, and they have a lot of individualized attention. But once you start getting to 4th and 5th and 6th grade, then
Yep.
the learning environment changes,
Right.
and so that's what happens to those kiddos. They fall
And-
further and further behind.
And that's 85% for West Virginia, anyway. 85% that aren't at level by 3rd grade never catch up.
Absolutely, and
That's a huge number.
That's part of the learning gap,
Right.
And then you can identify the kiddos who are most affected by that. But what's interesting is these differences actually start appearing in 3 and 4-year-olds in preschool.
Preschool, yes,
And
big
so-
topic for us.
And right now, of course, West Virginia has to have by 2014 universal pre-K.
Yep.
There's a lot of research going on. There has been, but there's a lot more development within West Virginia because, it's just so important.
Right.
And it's vocabulary. I use it in a different sense, but when these little guys and gals come into pre-K and we sit there and talk with them, within a few minutes, you can almost tell. I can take 2 students out of the same pre-K, 4-year-olds, and set them right beside, and one could have a 4,000 to 5,000 word vocabulary over their peer. And it's at that point where that learning gap begins.
Yeah, because when they hit kindergarten the next year, if you have that 4,000 to 5,000 vocabulary, you already know your sight words, you can start to read a little bit, you're ahead of the ball game. You're way ahead of the ball game.
And the effective piece of that is the parent.
Yep.
The parent is the child's first and most important teacher,
Yep.
period. Now, they're going to have great teachers, but the parent is the most important. And if we could work with the parents, and this is what's great about extended learning models, it has to be not only for the students, but the parents,
Yep.
or the family groups. I know, it's a lot of different folks helping raise
Right.
kids
Could
these
be
days.
grandparents or
Grandparents, aunts,
guardians,
uncles,
yep,
siblings.
yep.
But the point is that they're supported home.
Yep.
That the learning continues. Helianthus. It doesn't just stop
That's right.
at the end of the day. And that's what another great thing about the extended learning models is that it kind of keeps the idea in front of you that, I'm going to continue to learn.
Yep.
I'm not just going to, at 3 o'clock, boom, walk out the door, no more. I'm going to continue to learn, and I'm going to continue to learn in the summertime, and I'm going to continue to learn. And so what happens is that extended learning models right now are filling a gap, but they also are a precursor to what's going to be coming.
Yes.
So the more we get our systems and our school venues geared up towards that, the transition
Yep.
to that transformation is going to be smoother and more effective for all the kids.
And I agree. I think your use of transformation is going to be key in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's talk about the 21st century learner.
Okay.
We mentioned the 3 R's and the 4 C's.
Yep.
Walk us through that. If people aren't familiar with it, lay it out there for
The
them.
3 R's, typically reading, write, arithmetic.
Yep.
You gotta have that. But and those are you're going to have to be able to communicate.
Right.
But the 3 R's have been replaced with the 4 C's, which communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity.
Yep.
And the reason why those are more important now is because of the makeup and the nature of life as we know it. With the internet and all the social networking and the way people work together.
Right.
I used the word silos before. Now it's all about collaboration and working together. And this is the basic tenet for industry and the way you're going to make your living in the 21st century. There's a very important book written by an author named Richard Florida, he's an economist at Carnegie Mellon University. It's called The Rise of the Creative Class. And they talk about how those folks in the 21st century within the creative class are actually going to be the high wage earners.
Right.
And because their job and the jobs at which they engage are not well-paying jobs.
Right.
Good paying jobs. But it's also a different perspective on how you do your job. In other words, it's sometimes not so much about making a thing like industry or industrial. In fact, manufacturing is there's going to be less and less of that, and the service sector, and then the creative class, which are actually going to be driving the economic engines of the 21st century. So, that being said, what should our schools look like?
Yes.
So your term, and I like it as well, transformation. We can't continue to have a school that's fundamentally designed on a 19th century model with a 17th century framework.
Yep.
21st century is moving, I can't tell you what 5 years is going to look like, let alone 20 years. And I used to, when I interview my kindergarten parents, I tell them that all the jobs that you're going to apply for, 75% of the jobs that your child is going to apply have not yet been invented.
Right. They're not here yet.
So what do you teach them?
Yep.
Well, the idea, you go to school to learn stuff so you can get a job. Well, if we don't know what those jobs are going to be, so what? And then if it's all just going to school and learning facts, well, shoot, if you've got a handheld device, you can look up anything.
Yeah, that's a big key. People don't realize that.
Yeah, it's not about facts. So what do you teach? Well, how to work together.
Yep, how to communicate.
Collaborate, critical thinking, and creativity. Very important. And the key component of creativity is attached to the passion.
Yep.
And the environment in which you work. There has to be a tolerance to error.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go in and you're afraid to make a mistake, then you're never going to try anything new.
Yep.
But if making a mistake is okay, I mean, we're going to get the other stuff done, then folks are more likely, not only students, but teachers and people in business are more likely to try new things.
And that's, you're talking about mental sets and how people think and what they're afraid to do, what they're not afraid to do, and how they can start to learn new stuff.
Right.
And that's a huge key. So when we talk about that, we're starting to talk a little bit more about different learning venues and how you can have different based learning venues. And I know one of the favorite ones that you and I always talk about are arts-based.
Oh, well.
So let's start to steer the conversation that way. We're talking about learning venues.
Sure.
And,
well, the idea behind arts-based learning is a broad topic.
Right, yeah, it's very big.
Where you approach curriculum
and
mostly pedagogy. School improvement have basically been three flavors: assessment, curriculum, and pedagogy, the art of teaching.
Yep.
It's time to talk about pedagogy.
Yeah.
How do we go about teaching what it is that we need to teach children so that it engages them and keeps them moving? Well, the arts as a subject are, and they've always been part of a curriculum for over 5,000 years, the Greeks had. It's an actively engaging, thing. I mean, you have to do something.
Right.
Well, you can take any subject, and I love to tell the story about the kiddo who was learning about the Civil War and who wasn't a very good student and couldn't sit still in class, but yet he loved the Civil War.
Right.
And his mother was a seamstress. So between them two, they made a uniform.
Right.
And he learned all about that uniform. It happened to be a union uniform, the buttons and the material and the style and everything. And then they were reading a book, Red Badge of Courage, which has a very, poignant character. He was a Union soldier, young kid. So at the end of the project, he memorized a 20-minute speech, gave a talk about his uniform. He couldn't pass a test on a pencil paper, But do you think he learned something about the Civil
And he could
War?
make a project happen from A to Z.
Exactly.
The entire deal.
And he learned a lot about the Civil
Right.
War. So, and that's the end. That's the point. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, not being able to take the test as much
Right.
as being able to know them. So,
And learn how to learn.
exactly, and that's kind of the basic component of arts-based learning, is that we take those elements that represent the nature of the material,
Right.
the reality of the material, the part of it that makes you a unique person, make those connections,
Right.
and then make the learning personal. If you believe what Piaget says, who's a very famous psychologist, he says, when learning is at the emotional level, it's forever.
Yep.
Well, if you're enjoying something, you're having fun with it, and it's a passion, you're going to remember it. It doesn't matter
You
if it's
betcha.
math, science, history, social, whatever.
And
You're going to remember.
And I'll refer back to one of the best presentations I've seen was one that you've done with a set of drumsticks with little basketballs on the end of it. And it blew everybody away because it was learning like you were just describing.
Yeah.
You came in and posed a question. Does anybody in here think that I can dribble a basketball? And I don't know how many times. I can't remember.
Yeah.
So many times in a minute. But it was an outrageous number. We were like, yeah, I don't think so. Bob, I haven't seen you dribble a basketball, but I'm pretty sure no one could dribble that many times in a minute. And you came out, set up your drum, had your drumsticks, said, okay, now we're going to learn a little bit about math, timing, and rhythm through music. And so you start out with a basic beat that was so many times a minute, and then you upped it until you're just,
Yeah.
and it was 200 times in a minute, and you had little basketballs on the end. And the idea at that point of saying, you know what, we can learn math in different ways.
Absolutely.
And tying it to music, which kids love. I mean,
Yeah.
we just walk by our daycare and the kids are in
Sure.
there singing Christmas carols, which after the 30 days gets a little old, but still they're,
Kids always love music.
yeah. So tying those two together, talking about learning venues, and then especially when you start to focus on art space and how you can incorporate everything into that.
Yeah.
It changes the name of the game.
beauty of all that is it just makes you think about something different.
Right, and that's exactly right. We all start out with your presentation thinking basketballs and trying to picture you dribbling really fast.
Yeah, I can see
that. Yeah. And it turns into that cat's got two drumsticks with little basketballs on the end. Now we just got somewhere.
Yeah.
So changing your plane of thought
Yeah.
and how you look at things and breaking those mental sets of what's possible.
Absolutely. And
And then, as you said, what's coming in the future.
you know what? It was fun.
Oh,
It-
everybody at the end of it was sitting there, yeah, staying with the beat. All right, yeah, take it up a notch. Go faster.
Well, if they got it, but it were individuals such as you who actually saw the higher level implication. And
Oh,
I think
yeah.
That
breaks barriers.
Yeah, and I think that's the point here is that, we need to break those kind of emotional barriers with all learners. I mean,
Yes.
people get to the point where they feel like they have no choices, or they've been, failed.
Yep.
That's not the natural order of things.
Right.
The natural order of things is that you're going to eventually be successful.
Yep.
But the system perpetuates a certain process of doing things, and not everybody fits that process.
Right, and I think that's where your usage of education is going to transform.
Absolutely.
I think that's where it's going to take place in the future, and I think you're on the cutting edge of that. And that's why that's why we have you come to our programs, and I think that's why you're a consultant for people that are aware of what's coming and how it's going to start looking.
Well, I'll tell you, we several companies worldwide, big outfits, Google,
Right.
have started to embrace these concepts.
Yes.
They have what they call a 20% day.
Yep.
And that is where their engineers, 20%, 1 out of 5, get to work on whatever they're working on. It doesn't have to be successful, doesn't have to be anything it's whatever they want to work on.
Right.
Well, in the last 3 years, 100% of their NPD, new product development, has come out of their 20% day.
Yep.
So what that says is that not that their bosses are idiots. No, they're smart people too. The point here is at the 20% day, the engineers were able to bring themselves into the equation.
Right.
Their passion.
Yep.
Then they're much more productive.
And take some risk. And
Exactly.
Try out
without
different
failure,
venues.
without the fear of
Repercussions.
failure.
Yep.
Right.
Without the repercussions of
and-
doing a poor job.
Yeah, so he said, well, that wasn't really a good idea, but, we learned something about doing something, so we just, like Edison used to say, how many different times, hundreds of times to finally invent the light bulb, but, it's persistence. You know?
Oh, yeah.
And he finally got to the last one and it worked, but he knew 987 different ways it wasn't going to work.
Right, and that's the example I used to use with my college students was the 3M Post-it notes.
Yeah.
The 3M glue for Post-it notes was a failed glue.
Right.
The scientists that made that batch up said, man, this stuff just barely sticks, and it doesn't leave any residue. And everybody else is like, ooh, wait a minute. There's a use for that. And then the sticky was born, and how many people use stickies now?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's their number one best-selling
and that came from a different perspective. You know, the person who failed there was under one set of outcomes.
Right.
You know, but if you take a look at it from a different, and that's the idea.
That's the key. Change that perception, and
right.
Look what happens.
And you know, you can take a standardized curriculum, and in West Virginia we have content standards and outcomes, CSOs. You can take a standardized curriculum because it's on the West test, and it's you know, it's meant to, you know, the test is based on what the curriculum is, so the kiddos, and that's fine. But the whole point is that not all the kiddos get the curriculum in the same rate in the same sequence. Are they? And they're just as smart as other kiddos who do, but the test, the big test, doesn't take that into mind.
Right, doesn't account for that at all.
And you know what? And I'm just going to say this: not everything you need to know in life is on the big test.
I agree.
I'm just telling you that.
I agree, and I think that's the strength of what you bring to the table is the fact that you understand the school-based side of it and the State Department side of it, but you're able to work in the I won't say non-educational, but the non-school-based programs as well to tie them together.
Well,
that's the key.
You know, and that's the point that, you know, kind of circling back to what after-school programs are all about, extended learning models, is they allow the teachers to investigate different styles of learning or different pathways or different, you know, triggers that will engage the kiddos in that process. During the regular school day, when there's, you know, 22 or 3 or how many kiddos in the classroom, you know, they have to think in terms of the majority of the students. And after school is more about the individual students.
Right.
So if we can take those two things and kind of meld them together.
Yep, have that transformation happen and come down.
Right.
All right, well, we're here at Patch. I have Bob Dunkerley, the CEO and president of Helianthus LLC, and it's helianthusonline.com. And I'll spell it out for you, HELIANTHUS, and then online.com. And you can reach Bob Dunkerley here via the website and through email. And if you're out there and you have any questions, need more information, or want to do like we do and hire Mr. Dunkerley as a consultant and have him come in and strengthen your program, help your program, help with any continuous improvement plans or options or anything along those lines, or even data evaluation or marketing. This is your guy. So Bob Dunkerley with Helianthus and David with Patch here, and this show courtesy of ANMDigitalTechnologies.com. So we look to see you at our next show.
Thanks for watching. This has been a lot of fun.
Good times.
Alrighty.